And I think that new motherhood is often classified as the addition of things, right? There's a new baby, you've got a new identity. And of course, like all of those things are true. But there's also the loss of loads of things. Like your identity changes basically overnight. You went from being a pretty independent person usually to not being
attached to.
Yeah, like not being able to go to the toilet without sort of, some logistical planning going on.
Hello and welcome back to the Icon Edit. I'm your host Ivona. Today we are talking about something that a lot of women have trouble with, and it's motherhood. And I don't mean trouble in a bad way, but once we become mothers, everything changes. It's not only our bodies that change, it's the relationships that we have change with our partners, friends, and with the world in general, I would say. And there's a word for that, and it's called Matrescence, and I'm sure a lot of people have never heard about it, but there's an expert even for things you have never heard before, and Maddy Scott is my guest today. Hi, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. It's nice and calm in the studio, which is a bit of a different environment to what I left this morning, which was a lot of screaming children. So it's a pleasure to be here.
It's so funny because before we started recording, we were talking about our kids. And you are a mother yourself, and I'm too. And we both know that becoming a mother changes so much. So tell me how did you get into this field of matrescence? Can you explain what it is and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So matrescence, it's actually a really simple explanation for what it is. It's just the process of becoming a mother. And it's nice that there's a word for it, to be honest, because if you think about it in the same way as adolescence, so adolescence is the process of becoming an adult. And of course you become an adult on one day, whatever day you legally become an adult in the country that you're in, whether that's your 18th birthday, your 21st, of course, in some ways there's a day that you become an adult. But in many other ways, of course, we understand that it's a process. You don't wake up on your 18th birthday a totally different person. It's been a bit of a process. It's exactly the same with motherhood, of course. In one extremely real way, you become a mother on the day that your first child is born. But in another way, it's an identity, and it takes a while to step into. And so I think this idea that if you don't have it all figured out on day one, that's okay. And that's a very normal experience that people have. I guess my background is in occupational psychology, business psychology, coaching, and then I think talent development, and then I think becoming a mother made me realize, wow, that is a big life change, and that is where all of the things that you learn about in a psychology degree really kind of come to the front, and you think, this is a big identity shift. This is something that is really pressing.
Does it have an end? Because when you become a mother and you're in this matrescence phase, does it ever phase out? Or are you always in matrescence once you become a mother?
Good question.
What would you say?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so my kids are 1 and 2, so I kind of think, gosh, I feel like my identity as a mother changes daily, possibly. But I would say it's an ongoing process because your children are growing, you're growing, like that relationship changes, right? And so if it's the process of becoming a mother, that in and of itself is a changing identity, right? So I think it can be as ongoing as you want it to be. That would be my answer.
Why do you think motherhood is so disorienting for so many women? And because, sometimes I feel some women are like, I should be happy. I'm a mother. I love my kids. Mm-hmm. But then there are so many parts about it you just don't like or you have to get used to. So what do you say about that?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I think the happiness piece, I have a child, I should be happy. I think there's so much to dig into on that. I mean, I think firstly with new motherhood, when you first become a parent, almost none of the factors that you have there is a recipe for happiness. You're incredibly hormonal, you're incredibly sleep deprived, you're probably quite isolated. I mean, these are kind of some of the things that actually make that emotion of happiness kind of more difficult to find, perhaps. I think the other thing is it's important to remember, happiness is an emotion, right? So it's not something that we can necessarily hold on to and always have. And I think sometimes we have this idea of if we have children, that will be us happy. And of course, it's such a source of joy. And my children are such a source of joy in my life, of course. I love them like I've never loved anyone before. However, it's a lot to expect that I will just be happy forever now. That's kind of an unreasonable sort of expectation. And I think the other thing as well is things change all of the time. I think there's not necessarily the input that you put into your children. It's not an easy output as well, right? So if you think, I know we were talking before about like high achieving women, often we are at school, we chase A's, or like at work we're getting great performance reviews. That's not a thing when you have children. No one's giving you an A. There's no way to work out whether or not you're actually achieving. And so if that's something that's kind of important, that's a thing to kind of consider and think about, okay, so where is this like success, I guess, coming from? What does success look like now? Because it's going to be different when you're raising children. You can do everything in inverted commas right.
Yeah.
And actually your kid still might not sleep. Your kid still might not eat their vegetables. Your kid still might, not
misbehave.
Exactly. And so I think it's like really, there's so much going on. And I think that if we're not feeling happy all of the time, I think that's just such a normal
It is normal, but it makes a few women, I think, feel a little guilty because they're thinking like, I should be happy, I should be this, I should be that. And this is maybe also, that's what you said before, like being high achieving and a perfectionist in some way. You just want everything to be the right way, So, and then motherhood is such a chaotic phase. Like you can't predict what's happening. Your kids do whatever they want, you don't know what's going to happen in the next second or next year or whatever. But this is also something I think that makes women feel lonely once they become mothers. So I myself felt very lonely, especially I was a very young mother at my age when I became a mother for the first time. None of my peers had kids. So suddenly I was all alone. And so many people like almost let you fall, once you become a mother, which is so weird. Why does that happen? Is it like people or society tends to, let motherhood be like an isolated thing and not take part in it?
Gosh, I mean, there's so much in what you were just saying, even in that run-up to that question. There's like good, there's shoulding, there's perfectionism, and then loneliness. Like loneliness is huge. It's a huge, huge topic. There's lots of different studies looking into loneliness in sort of the postpartum experience. And there's lots of different ones. And honestly, the statistics for who reports feeling lonely or what percentage reports feeling lonely is a huge range, but from what I take from the data is either a big like chunk of women to basically all women
oh my God,
feel lonely or experience some form of loneliness after having a baby, and quite a huge percentage of people spend just quite a lot of time alone, except for their baby when they've had their child. To kind of go to your point of you having your child young, I think about my friends who had children young all of the time. And I actually think it's strange because I was reflecting on this, knowing that I was going to come on and talk to you. I think that my friends who had children young, I almost saw them quite a lot still. Say some of my friends who had children in their like late teens, early 20s, I probably did still see them on nights out, on weekends away. Maybe I would go to their house because it's obviously easier for the person without the child to travel.
Yeah.
And possibly like the examples I can think of, like their parents were around to support them and help them, which is obviously a fantastic source of support.
But then mostly they are still working.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that they were able to do those things because they had support, but they were able to go and see these people. So I didn't necessarily feel like when my friends who had children young, I didn't necessarily feel like I was seeing them less. But now when I think about what we spoke about, like I didn't have the conversational toolkit to talk to them about how they were feeling. Now I'm on the other side of it. And I always say this is the thing that I felt so strongly when I first had my first son and I was still in the hospital. I was thinking, how have people been doing this whole time? Like I can't believe that my friends, my colleagues, like my parents, like my friends' parents. Like, I can't believe that they just were all doing this and I had no idea. So I think the difficulty with, if you have your children before other people, maybe you see them more. That was my experience. Maybe they didn't feel the same, but maybe you see them the same amount, but they don't have the ability to talk about it. And like they're probably thinking, I was up 6 times with the baby and I'm just there talking about,
your
the
last nights out.
playlist. Yeah, exactly. It's just a totally different. And now I think I'm in my mid to late 30s. A lot of my friends have children. I'd say probably the majority do, not all, but a lot of them do. And so probably we do have that shared experience so that when we do meet up, we can empathize a lot more and we can understand, and there is that shared experience that is really helpful. However, it's difficult to see each other because we have work schedules, we have nap schedules, we live in different countries, we live in different parts of the country. And so I think
even if you live in the same city, it's sometimes hard.
Yeah. So I obviously live in Dubai. A lot of my friends are back home. Even when I stay in London and my friends are in London, often I'm staying in one part of the city. They're in a totally different part. We either have to meet in the middle of the city and, try and find a cafe that won't mind some screaming children, or one of us has to travel for 45 minutes, by which time they'll need a nap, they'll need changing, they'll need a feed. And so logistically, it is a bit of a nightmare. But I think the other thing, like loneliness is obviously not a particularly pleasant emotion in and of itself, because you can feel isolated, you can feel like you don't have people to talk to, but it also can breed to things like shame, and that guilt can maybe turn into shame. And I think that's the other thing about loneliness. Like, yes, of course, it's not very nice to feel like I'm by myself with this. But then actually, if you're having all of those other difficult thoughts and feelings that are really common in new motherhood, if you're not talking to other people about that, that can lead to it being more of a problem because you don't realize that other people are experiencing those things as well.
I think one of those feelings is also grief in a sense, because you grieve your old self.
Yes.
And the person you were before you became a mother. And this is, I think, so this is something that I struggled a lot with, to be honest. Now that my kids are at an age where I'm now back to my old self, let's say, or new self, or however you would say, it's so much easier. But I remember, like, especially the first years, it was kind of a grief about the person I lost. And that was basically me.
Yeah, totally.
It's horrible.
Totally. I think that there's a huge part in that for sure. And I think that new motherhood is often classified as the addition of things, right? There's a new baby, you've got a new identity. And of course, like all of those things are true. But there's also the loss of loads of things. Like your identity changes basically overnight. You went from being a pretty independent person usually to, not being
attached to.
Yeah, like not being able to go to the toilet without sort of, some logistical planning going on. And so I think it's, again, like I think it's a really common experience, and one that if we don't talk about it, people don't realize that they are not alone with stuff like that. Even like a silly example, like when I was newly postpartum with my first, I felt very bonded, very attached. Every time I closed my eyes, I could basically see his face. I think there was a lot of anxiety in that, but I felt very full of love, I guess. Well, no, definitely very, very full of love. But also, I was so aware that my mind was almost trying to make a decision. It was kind of thinking, babies, good decision or bad decision? I honestly remember thinking so here are all the pros, I really love him, he's really cute, look at his little squishy face. Cons, I just feel like I'm not myself anymore. I feel like I'll never sleep again. I feel like I'm only thinking about him, and that's the only thing I can think about. And honestly, the baby was here. This was not a decision I was making pre-children. My baby was very much here, and yet my brain was still trying to think is this a good decision? I'm not sure. And it took a while.
A little too late.
Yeah, but I think it takes a while for you to catch up. And I think that's why matrescence is such a nice term, because you can realise that it's a stepping into it. I don't think about that decision anymore. Yeah. It is this time. And like I said before, I think it can go on as long as for the rest of your life probably. But I think at that start is very intense, and sort of like the way that you think about your children, the way that you feel about yourself, I think that they change so much, particularly in that first year, and particularly with your first. I think that, it's a huge thing.
What would you say is typically, how does matrescence typically affect romantic relationships? Because this is also something, of course, the relationship with your partner changes a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the biggest problems that women have when in that stage of the life?
Yeah, I mean, it affects all relationships, right? But the relationship that you're having with the person who's also raising that child with you is obviously going to be massively impacted as well. Yeah. I think that both of you are going through probably the biggest change you've ever been through. The person who's given birth is also battling with all these hormonal changes, often sleeping less. I mean, my husband was very open to the idea of getting up and feeding the baby in the night, but I was breastfeeding, so it always felt a bit pointless. Yeah. What are you doing here? Like, you're not really needed. Or he'd feed the bottle, but I'd have to pump anyway. So there are some kind of differences or difficulties. I think that it's not necessarily this kind of level playing field kind of to start with. But I think the other thing that is really interesting, if you kind of link matrescence and having a new baby with work as well. So when I've spoken to lots of women in the course of what I do, often the first 2 weeks, say, in the UK certainly, they're very generous 2-week paternity leave. Often men do take longer, but that's using up their holiday and things like that. So those first 2 weeks is like all hands on deck, everyone figuring everything out. How does this thing work? What makes it stop crying? Yeah. What does it, how do we feed it? Kind of feels quite egalitarian, quite shared, like notwithstanding the things I mentioned earlier. But then once the non-birthing partner goes back to work, you're at home with the baby, feeling lonely, feeling where is my old self, feeling, like not like you understand everything.
Also a little bit of jealous about the other 100%, person, right?
100%.
Like you can just go back to work on your old life, and I'm stuck here with this little screaming thing, right?
But I think it's sort of this both and is a term that's like used a lot, and I think there's not necessarily loads of women that I speak to who are like, I wish I'd gone back to work at 2 weeks.
Yeah.
However, there is an element of you've gone back to your old life. Like you've gone back to speaking about things that aren't around nap schedules or like feeding amounts and things like that. And I think that there absolutely can be an element of jealousy in that. But for the person who's gone back to work, they might be thinking, it's heartbreaking for me to leave my baby in the morning. And I don't want to be talking about this thing that, we've been talking about for the last year at work. So I think there can be an element of both people feeling like they've got the raw end of the deal sometimes. And I think it's just taking a step back and thinking, okay, like, how can we be on the same side here? Which is absolutely easier said than done. But kind of thinking about, it is a difference. And the other thing about the person staying at home with the baby is the baby changes. Like, what
it doesn't all stay a baby.
Yeah, and what got them to sleep at 2 weeks probably isn't going to sleep at 6 weeks. And so that's what I remember speaking to lots of people about in those early stages. Like, you figured it all out. Then you basically have to kind of go it alone because you're figuring out this baby by yourself. And then at the weekends or in the evenings when your partner's like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, that's not what works anymore. And you just kind of think, actually, that's challenging, right? On top of everything else.
What do you think is a good way for mothers to communicate these needs or this feelings that they have, especially in the early stages with their partner? What would you just be open about it, or would you even recommend having the talks like this before the baby is even born? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea. I think that absolutely. I think talking is always a good idea, right? Like not letting things fester, not letting things build up. I think absolutely kind of understanding some work on like values and how you want to be both in your relationship and as parenting. I think that can be like really interesting to do before the baby. I think there's an element of you don't know what you're about to step into as well. And so with all the best intentions, things are sometimes going to be unexpected. And I think there's a difference between cognitively understanding that this is going to be a challenging time and then being in the challenging time can be two quite different experiences. I mean, I do think talking about it, again, it's about the understanding that things change as well as a really healthy perspective. I think understanding that how you feel when your baby is 2 months is not how you're going to be feeling when your baby is 22 months or 22 years. Like it changes and kind of not. I use this with sleep with friends, this sort of phrase, which is, don't despair, don't get smug when it's with sleep, because you have a terrible night and you're like, oh no, this is the worst thing ever. I'm never going to be able to sleep again. And then you have a night where maybe they sleep sort of 8 hours and you think, I've sorted it, everything's going to be fine. And then the next night, they wake an hour after. And so I think just that, I guess the core of that sort of thought is that things do change and that things don't remain the same even in that first year. And so I think absolutely talking about it, not letting it fester,
but maybe not in the situation where you're most frustrated, right?
Totally,
because I think that's the hardest part, when you're everyone's sleep deprived and, then this feelings, as you said, fester and then you have like a nervous breakdown or you start screaming at your partner because it's just too much at some point.
So I mean, it's 100% understandable. I think like everyone I speak to argues more with their partner after they had a baby, and if they don't, like I would like to understand like how they do it.
It's a challenge for a relationship, right?
Absolutely. But I also think like the same rules apply as ever, right? Probably you're not going to change your behavior because someone's screaming at you to do it. It can be a really useful like starting point to be like, oh, okay, something is wrong here, or like something needs to be addressed. But then maybe the solution comes when everybody's nervous system is a little bit more calm.
What would you say, when is the point where you would recommend someone to get help from outside?
I'm not a mental health practitioner, but there are categories that people can look to understand whether or not what they're experiencing is maybe more than is kind of typical. For example, things like postnatal depression, my understanding is it's a feeling of feeling low for more than 2 weeks, and it can happen anywhere up into the first year after having a baby. Some people actually find the beginning okay, and then maybe month 6 it becomes a lot more difficult and they feel a lot lower. Generally sort of the first 2 weeks, if you're feeling really low, that is seen as a normal part of the wonderful topsy-turvy birthing kind of new mum experience. And I didn't have postnatal depression with either of my children, but certainly with my first, I felt low, and I felt low before. I'm a human, we all feel low. This was something else. And I think that sometimes just feeling those, understanding that sometimes there's nothing that you can do. Like if you're in that kind of hormonal pit and it is within those kind of first 2 weeks, unfortunately, like it is, or fortunately, that you just have to wait a lot of the time. And I think sometimes we can really want a solution. I remember actually I was very, very sad. I think it was weird. It was like day 5, I was like crying. Day 6, I was totally fine. Day 7, I was like sobbing all day again. Day 8, I was totally fine. It was very much like a roller coaster.
Up and down,
But my husband really wanted to like solve the problem. And I remember he like went and bought me a water bottle. He'd go on errands all the time. And he'd come back and be like, I've bought you this water bottle. It means that you don't have to like reach for a glass if you're feeding the baby. And like you can open it with one hand. And I was like, this is like a lovely gift. This is like so thoughtful. I love it. I still use it. This is amazing. I'm still crying.
Yeah, but I mean, men, I think, feel helpless at this point also, right? They want to help, but there's not, as you said, there's no solution. You just have to go through it.
And then, of course, if it carries on for over that 2-week period and you still think, I'm feeling very low, I'm feeling like this is really, I can't get myself out of this, I think it's always a good idea to speak to somebody who can help professionally. Obviously, it changes where you are in the world, but a good start is always going to your GP and they can point you in the right direction. But I also think engaging in something like therapy is a thing that you can do even if you don't meet a clinical threshold. If you can afford it and if you have the time to do it and if you have the mental headspace, I think being able to access therapy even if you don't necessarily have postnatal anxiety or postnatal depression, I think that can be a really beneficial thing to be able to do to help you because it's such a huge change.
Yeah. And then when you go back to work, let's talk about that. So once you are, after some time, you go back to work as a mother, a totally changed human being. What do you think women struggle most with when they go back to work? Is it the letting go of the kid, the emotional component, or what would you say?
Oof, I mean, I think it very much depends on the individual, right? But for sure, it can be a challenging time. And I think it can be a challenging time whether you get 2 weeks off, which is the case, especially in the US a lot of the time, or you get the full year or even longer in some countries with really generous maternity leave. I think there's so many things that go into it. Absolutely, there's the leaving of a child that you've built up this really strong bond with, and you have this really strong bond with. That is challenging for many women. There's also guilt. You feel guilty about not being there for your kids when you're at work, but then also you feel guilty for not working when you're with your children. I think there can be a loss of confidence because perhaps you've been away from the workplace for a certain amount of time. You're not necessarily feeling like your best self. This idea of mum brain isn't really held up in the data, by the way, but I think a lot of people think that they're not going to be on top of their game, and they think other people will think that as well. So there's often, sometimes it is the environment. Like, I definitely speak to women who have been treated poorly when they've gone back to work, but sometimes it is what we think other people are thinking about us. So I think there's a lot that goes into it.
But what often also happens, I think, is that your ambitions also change, right? Some women, they just don't feel like they need to climb the ladder anymore because their priorities change. So they want to be there. Obviously, they want to work and earn money, but then they also want to be with their kids. So they don't have the feeling that they need to, be constantly in their career, know?
That can be the case for women, for sure. I think that it is interesting, and I think it would be different for all women, like, for sure. Like, I think there's another factor. Like, lots of women I speak to are still incredibly ambitious and still have the same career desires and wants that they had before. However, they also want to be a present parent, and so that comes with challenges. Other women want to step back and step away from their career for a little bit to be fully with their children, and lots of women are kind of in the middle. And I think I speak to very few women who aren't ambitious at all. It's just definition of success can change because you've got this other huge element in your life now. And so I think that's a really worthwhile thing doing, just understanding and taking a minute to think about, like, what does success actually mean to me now? What are my values when I think about being a working parent? And that means that if you understand what it is that you want and what it is that you can hope for, then I think that is the first step to then being able to set better boundaries, or to be able to understand that you might be having some difficult thoughts and feelings with regards to this, but you know that this is what you want to be doing. You want to be going towards this particular point.
And then there's the whole topic of mental load, right? So even if you're not working, but especially when you're working, there's so many things on your mind. Like, women, we constantly have to think in the background about, oh my God, there's this appointment at 3 p.m. and then after that, the kid needs to nap, and I still have to buy some glue for school tomorrow. And there's this project I need to help my kid with on the weekend. And, this constant, thinking. And how can you, go through this without going completely insane, And I think maybe, so for me, I would say delegating is a good thing. Just, even if your partner doesn't do it the way you're doing it, because you think you're doing it perfectly, just let it go. Sometimes it's not worth the struggle,
I hear people talk, I think it might be Emily Oster who's spoken about this, that she talks about total responsibility transfer. So if you think about cooking, it's not that, let's say the person who has the higher mental load says the person with the lower mental load, I want you to cook tonight. It's not just about getting the saucepans out. It's also about thinking around, what do we have in the cupboards? Like, what did we eat yesterday? What's nutritionally varied? What's tasty? How long will it take? So it's not just about part of the job. It's like the whole job. And again, I think when you're figuring out what this life looks like with your family, and that involves like work and childcare and everything, just figuring out who's responsible for what can be quite interesting.
Yeah, because the roles can change, right?
100%.
I mean, after you have a kid, sometimes people start doing things that they never did before. you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there also something like this for men? Is there something like Matrescence? Or
Yes, that's a word.
Is it?
It is.
Yeah, is it the word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a word. And there's big changes for men as well. I think that I'm always really wary that I don't want it to seem like it's mums versus dads, or like women versus men. It's like everybody.
Because it's a team effort, right?
Exactly, and like everyone's going through this like huge change, and I think that like talking about it, understanding like what you value as a collective and like what your setup looks like, I think is the most important thing. And to understand that like everyone's finding this challenging, like everyone, whatever your setup, there are some things that are really working in your favor, and there are some things that are going to be more challenging. Yeah.
Is there something, because I feel that a lot of women who don't have children, or people who don't have children, because it's also men, they just don't get it. You know, you have to, it sounds maybe mean, but if you don't go through it, you will never know. And how can you, is there something you would wish non-parents would understand about matrescence? It's a hard question, right?
It is a really hard question. It's kind of a delicate question as well, because it's sort of thinking I remember one of my friends who had a child early speaking to me and saying, I'm not being patronizing when I'm saying that you can't understand. You just can't understand. And like, it's just because you've not been through this experience. It's nothing about like you. It's nothing about how empathetic you are or not. It is just that it is a really unique thing, I guess, to go through, even though so many people kind of do go through it. I was actually speaking to someone end of last week who described it as almost like seeing a new color. And you can try to describe it to other people as much as you can, but there's always going to be an element of like, until you can see it, you can't really understand.
That's such a good analogy.
Which I thought was quite nice. Yeah, quite a nice analogy, because it's not really like it's nobody's at fault here. Like nobody's better than somebody else.
Yeah.
It's just an experience that, you know, it's really hard. And I think I had my children around the same time as lots of my friends were having children, and so coming up to it, I think something's going to be big, but until you do it, you can't really understand. So I think just knowing that there's just so much that you can't understand until you've gone through it, but that's okay. Like it is just a huge change. I mean, that's enough to kind of know.
Yeah. And how, especially in the workplace, I think it's good to keep an open mind towards this person and to hear them out, and you know, just don't be too hard on them. I would say, because I sometimes have the feeling that parents get a little bit judged, you know, especially because they have like some privileges at work. Let's say, okay, they leave at a certain time, or they go to like a recital and then they have to leave early, and then there's always this, you know, in the background there's because you're a parent, you get all the benefits.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly an argument for more flexible work in general.
Yeah.
I think that everybody benefits from more flexible work, right? And also, although, like, yes, I'm sure that is the case in a lot of instances, I know lots of parents that I speak to feel guilty when they're leaving early to pick up the kid from nursery, or they feel like it's a really awkward conversation to say, oh, please, can I go and see my kid in this play? And they feel like it's impacting their career in some way as well to have those conversations. I will say that, so I worked in talent development for many years, and talent development is obviously all about trying to improve performance. And so understandably, we focus on transitions within the workplace. So often talent development focuses on when you become a new manager, or when you become a new leader, or when you change career. And I think for me now, having had children, I just think, how is it not on our roadmap more support for working parents? Because if you think about all the big transitions in your life, like having that kid is huge. And so I actually think that's somewhere that talent development needs to move to a lot more strongly. How can we support people in what they're going through, whatever that is? Like, it's not, children isn't the only one, but it's one that a lot of your employees will be going through at some point. And I think actually thinking about how you can best support them there is really important because, there's a meeting with HR and maybe there's a working group that thinks about parents.
Yeah.
But actually, it's huge. There should be more support to understand how do you fit all this work that you were doing previously into this new life that you've got.
Yes.
And I do think that is an area that workplaces will need to get better
That's actually a good point. Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to your new identity as a mom and your emotional new needs that you have, what would you say is a good, a practical tool that you can use to, just get acquainted with your new self? Is it journaling maybe, or I don't know, or some grounding habits that you can incorporate into your life?
I mean, I think anything that helps you to understand what is going on is beneficial. I've talked about it already, but I do think values is a really important thing to do. I think when everything's up in the air and your thoughts and feelings are wow, what's going on? I think having values as a grounding practice can be really, really helpful. The other thing that I've been reading about lately is this idea of how is it that you can almost step fully into whatever role you're about to take on. So, and I mean that in terms of transitioning. So if you're a working parent, when you're moving from being around your kids to going into the workplace and then back again, how do you transition well? How can you almost, and by the way, this is something that you can do when you have children and when you don't have children. How do you transition from kind of one role to the other well? Because if you are in the playground with your kids, but you're constantly thinking about the presentation that you're making tomorrow and adding slides or getting pinged on Slack and responding, have you transitioned well? And also if you're at work and you're kind of thinking, oh gosh, I feel bad, what are they doing? And, blah, blah, blah. And there's this idea actually that if you use very different skills in your work and your home life, that can actually help to replenish the other. So when, for example, if you had a really tough weekend with the kids and you were they were around the whole time, they're kind of driving you a bit mad, you're a bit exhausted by the end of it, you're probably going into work phew,
I always joke that I'm going to the office for it's like a spa day for me.
Totally. Yeah. There's an element of that. You can be okay, let me relax. I can actually have a coffee. I could go to the toilet without checking that that's okay.
And have an adult conversation.
Exactly. So I think you'll go in feeling replenished for the work that maybe you were feeling a bit tired about on Friday. And then maybe by the end of the day, you're missing your kids and you want to get back to them and you want to see them. And the same with work. If it's been a really stressful time, actually, if you can fully detach and go to that playground and get involved in the game that they're playing with, then you can go back to the workplace probably feeling a bit refreshed as well. And I was reading that in the context of guilt, because actually the idea is with guilt, we're always thinking about what we're not doing. So we're thinking about, okay, we're not doing the thing that we are doing. And actually that doesn't allow us to be totally immersed in the thing. So if we can kind of almost tell our minds, thanks for checking in and making sure that I know that I have these two elements in my life that I really value and I want to show up and do well in. But actually, if you can let me concentrate on work fully for the next few hours, I'll actually be going back a more refreshed parent, and vice versa as well. If I can just make sure that I'm really focusing on my children right now and not being dragged away. Being present, exactly. And by the way, so much easier said than done. It's not about judging when you can't do that. It's just understanding that actually there's benefits in doing that will maybe help.
Yeah, that's so true. I have one last question for you. What would you like new mothers to know? Is there one thing or a few things that you would like, or what would you tell a new mom about matrescence?
Do you know, there's obviously a load of things, but I would say one is I just don't think that you can tell new mums that you're doing a good job enough. I think just hearing you're doing a good job, of course there's issues with external validation. You have to feel like you're doing a good job yourself and not look to other people. But I think in those first few weeks and months where you really don't know what you're doing, the world's upside down, what is happening, I think just someone who's often who's been there before, or just anyone who's like watching you with your baby saying, you're doing amazingly.
Yeah, you just need that reminder, right?
I think so. I think that's okay. And I think just looking for that. And when someone told me that, it did make me feel like, oh, like, am I? But thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I think you can slowly kind of start to
because you're
believe it.
biased towards yourself sometimes. I think it's good to hear it from the outside.
Totally,
you know?
yeah. So I
That's
think
so good.
that's something you can tell new mums. And also, honestly, I know not everybody thinks this, but I do think it gets easier. My kids are 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Let me say I have not got it all figured out. But for me personally, okay, maybe easy is the wrong word, but I do think it gets different, right? It never gets easy, but it gets different.
Easier for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And people say, oh no, it doesn't, like, I think I now no longer wake up 6 times a night. I now no longer need to feed my baby with my body, so I can't be away from him for like more than, like 45 minutes. And so I think that you do start to step into that identity. I think don't worry if you don't have it all figured out on day one. Don't worry if you don't feel like you're 100% enjoying every second. That's another thing we say, isn't it? Enjoy every minute.
Honest, you have to just get to know your kids.
100%,
you know, like this is like a new human being, and you don't know this human being. You don't know nothing about it. It, you know, the longer you are in this parental stage, and the more you get to know your kids, the easier it really gets, because you get an understanding for what the other person wants and needs, and the other way around. You know, kids are smart. They see the parent. They can even feel your like. They look at your eyes and they know exactly what's gonna happen next. You know. So this is something that I think I love to remind people. This is a new human being. You don't know it, so you have to get used to it. And
100%. It's a new relationship, and it's a different relationship to anyone that you've ever had before. Like,
absolutely.
You know, it's a very a relationship that comes with a lot of responsibility, but absolutely you're getting to know each other.
And you get your independence back, like your like body independence, as you said, and everything. So it gets easier in that sense. Definitely, it gets easier. Yeah. Maddy, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation and a relief also, because it puts language to something that so many women feel to struggle with, but are afraid to like say it out loud. But we can say it out loud. Motherhood is not easy. It changes you. You just have to adapt to your new identity, reevaluate, as you said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a lovely conversation, and I will link all of your website, Instagram, whatever you have, in the show notes. So if anyone wants to know more about Matrescence, they can reach out to Maddy. And thank you so much for the insights. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
All right. Done.
Thank you. It was great. Look, it was nothing to be...
Yeah.